All right. I think it's working. Perfect. Okay. So I've got Loreta Tarozaite with me here today, and we're going to be talking about looking good when you're talking to people over video calls. And we're going to start in just 1 minute.
I'm David C. Barnett, and you're tuned in to Small Business and Deal Making, the podcast, YouTube channel, and blog where I talk about buying, selling, financing, and managing small and medium-sized businesses while controlling risk. So if you're looking to take control of your future through buying a business one day, or if you already own a business and you're looking to grow or exit, you've come to the right place. I talk about interesting things, I talk to interesting people, and I answer your questions every week right here. So be sure to hit like and be sure to hit subscribe, and let's get to it. Are you thinking of growing your business or beginning a journey into entrepreneurship? Take a shortcut to success by buying an existing and profitable business the right way. Visit businessbuyeradvantage.com and learn more about my online training, group coaching, and consulting services designed to help you win.
Loreta, how are you today?
I'm good. Thank you very much. How are you?
I'm doing really well. Where are you joining us from today?
I live in Las Vegas. That's my home studio, or I should say home office. And that's where I'm joining you. I was just coming back from an event in Silicon Valley last week. So I'm coming from a very busy environment at the moment. Need to reset myself.
And you have a lot of history working with Silicon Valley companies, and we're going to dip a little bit into that. Why don't we kick that off? You're here today to talk about appearance and presence on camera when doing video calls or presentations, but you really have a broader sort of aesthetic marketing kind of content background. Why don't you give us a little bit of an introduction of who you are and how you came to be doing the type of work that you're doing today?
Yes, thank you so much. My background is TV journalism. I was born and raised in Lithuania. That's where my career started. I specifically focused on broadcast journalism. So to me, the visual with a story or with the words always go hand in hand. When somebody says something, I start visualizing how that message will look like. It's just innate in my nature. I never liked writing, articles, filling in the space. I always liked sort of the multimedia aspect when it comes to storytelling. So that's what my background is. And I've since we moved to the United States in 2003, I've sort of shifted my career focus in telling business stories. YouTube back then was just up and coming in 2009, 2010 is when I started my video producing freelance business. And that's where I realized that there's a huge potential in actually humanizing the companies, telling their stories through video, showing the people behind the businesses that we all admire. And like I said, when it started as a video, it then expanded more to sort of how does video as an asset fit into the bigger marketing and communication strategy within the organization.
Yeah, this is kind of a left field sort of question, but I've certainly noticed in my life, and I was born in the mid '70s, that at one time businesses were really trying to project this sort of brand front. Even small businesses were trying to project, we are the whatever company, right? And then it almost seemed like there were these, sort of characters, these important people in the world of business that started to get their own kind of brand. And then as social media grew, I remember back in the early 2000s, a lot of business owners would ask, how do I keep my online social media and my business stuff separate? And then there was this big realization, well, you don't. And people are going to find out who you are, and they're going to realize, they're going to figure out if they want to do business with your company, because they're going to want to know, who am I doing business with? Can you talk a little, first of all, am I correct or wrong? And can you talk a little bit about how this evolution has occurred?
Yes, you're definitely correct. We all have grown up with ads on TV, right? That's the only way to sort of understand or get a sense of what the company is about. We didn't grow up with people or leaders of those companies talking to us directly. And I think that perspective changed, as you pointed out, with the social media coming into the mix, and with the YouTube videos coming into the mix. When anybody right now can be a journalist, right? You are sitting in a conference, for example, listening to somebody talk on stage. you decide to record a video of them talking on stage so that you have those points, to reference back, on your own, or you can reshare something that you liked immediately, real time. So leaders and companies, to me, or representatives, I should say, of the companies and companies themselves, to me, always go hand in hand. I never separate the two of them. Right now, it all depends on the type of business that we're talking about. If you're a small mom and pop business, you don't go marketing necessarily your business on that scale. You are that person who people come to see, who have a relationship, on a smaller scale that they built over the years with you. But if you're a brand, as how we understand the brand, that becomes a little bit more tricky how you manage the reputation, by being you as a leader, saying things online or sharing messages or whatever you speak on stage and somebody captures, or whoever talks to you and captures on camera, that you said and then republishes it. That has become a little bit more tricky to manage. So there's a lot of PR nightmares that are out there, that have happened because of the situation that somebody said something that they shouldn't have, and it went out. So it is all mastering the type of communication and knowing, the public rules, public speaking rules of what you can say, how you can say it, and what you should not be saying. But the two always go hand in hand. If somebody has a recognition of the brand and they start learning about the leader who is communicating about the brand completely differently than what we've been feeling it sort of is a whiplash. It's like, well, wait a minute. I thought this brand represented XYZ, but this leader has nothing. It's completely off. It doesn't resonate how they talk, how they speak, the things that they say, and vice versa. The leader could be the one saying the right things, but the image of the brand is completely opposite. So the two always have to be aligned, and especially when the company is going through the growth stages, right? That's when it becomes. That's when the company becomes more visible. The leaders become more visible. They have to start understanding the dynamics of the external communications.
So I'm remembering. I think I saw once there was, and I forget the name of the company, but there was some company, and they had a corporate leader, the head of the business, and they were creating all kinds of very positive messages. And then this photo of him on African safari, like standing over the animal he just shot,
Mm,
circulated,
mm,
and there was a big sort of backlash because the sort of brand elements of his business were not in alignment with that kind of hobby. Like, so he wasn't representing, for example, a crossbow company, right? Which very well could have been in alignment, but there was this big backlash, like, oh, here this guy is talking about this sort of thing, and now he's actually shooting these animals. And so, the way I've often expressed it to people is that in the modern era, you got to walk the talk. Like, if you are going to paint your business and your brand in a certain light, you really have to be that person. You have to behave in that way. Do you think it's harder for, people to kind of hide behind a mask of managed marketing messages these days?
It is, and I also don't remember the name of the company, but I think I remember reading the news about this particular situation that you're referring to, and it is difficult, and I can understand, that sometimes the personal hobbies and personal things that we do as executives, right, intersect with being a little bit more official when it comes to representing the company. Now, and that's purely my example. I made a rule to myself when I started building out a little bit of my own presence online. I'm not going to talk about anything personal. I'm not going to talk about anywhere I travel unless it sort of ties back to the business, or I have an idea that I want to share as I was traveling, and an idea popped and I wanted to record it. And I happened to be in a different country, in a different city at that time. That's the relationship. But it is a line that the more visible the executive is, the more they have to be aware of how they are being perceived. Yes, those hobbies are great, but it clashes with what the company represents, and you're the face of that company. And that's normally how people associate the brands. There's a face to that company that's tied to it, which is an executive leader. Then in people's minds, it's a not a clash, but it is a clash. It is a clash of understanding what that company represents and who that leader is really about. Are they authentic? Are they real? Are they just pretending? Because like you said, maybe it's just marketing messages written for them, but they don't really believe in those messages themselves. They're just representing the company outside of
Mm.
who they are as a person.
What about history? So what if, a business gets a new leader,
Mm.
and that leader may, say, okay, now this is what we're going to do online. I mean, do you think people should go back and sort of curate or prune their historical social media footprint?
No, but I think that and I'm a communicator by nature. So whenever there is a change, it has to be communicated so that it's not a shock to the system, to the audience, internal and external, right? So if there is a new leader and they manage things differently or they talk about things differently, it almost influences internal culture as well of the organization. So internal employees
Mm.
have to be bought into this idea, or they decide to leave if they don't buy into this idea. And for the social media, there has to be communication going out. Look, new leader, new face, new company direction, something that talks that it's new. And then it starts building that newness, later on. Not a lot of people go back, into the history to start looking how it correlates or
But
not, unless you want.
what about that leader's social media footprint from before they joined the company?
Oh, that's a good question. That's a good question. I never thought about it from that perspective. However, my initial thinking right now is the reason why they join a certain company, they probably are aligned to a certain degree with that new culture, with that company that they're joining,
Mm.
right? Unless it's a board directive, they just have to do what they're told to do. But in general, there should not be a huge discrepancy in terms of who they were before to what they need to be to represent a new company. However, it all also goes back to the organizational culture. What you have been doing maybe for company X is not going to be acceptable for company Y anymore moving forward. So it's all about, I think when it comes to executives, it's a little bit more gradual. It's not that big of a shock, to people, because he is a human or she is a human. So there is natural understanding that they were representing somebody else and now they're representing somebody else. So it's more natural than when you say, if you have a strong brand recognition, out of the blue something else starts happening with this brand, it's a little bit bigger of a shock, than to the person themselves.
So, and within the small business context, I would probably say to a lot of people, like, when you're creating content on social media as an individual private person, if you aspire to one day be a business owner, whether through startup or acquiring a business, I think that you should start. What is that expression? Be, do, have. Like, you become the change in your own mind and start acting that way, and eventually you fill into that role. Is be thinking about that. Be thinking about yourself in the context of the way you wish to be in the future, and give yourself a little bit of pause, before you hit send late on a Saturday night on that tweet or whatever, and just ask yourself, if this down the road, if someone dug this up, like, is this going to be some kind of problem? Because there are a lot of embarrassing things that have been dug up from people's past, right?
100%. That's the best rule of thumb that I keep mindful of. And that I think applies to anybody, even if it's not a business. It can apply to a college student, whatever sounded cool and
Yeah.
looked cool when you were in college, your employees right now research you. So be wary of what you do online. And yes, it's an open platform, freedom of speech, all of that is great. But just think about how any of it will affect your business, your organization, or your career in the end.
Yeah.
That's the best rule of thumb to keep in mind.
We've got some people already filing in. Victor says hello from Nottingham. He's already liked the video. So, yes, please hit the like button. It helps the algorithm show us to new people. Jack Cox has suffered an explosion of some kind. He says, boom. Good to see you there, Jack. And we've also got,
Hopefully he's still
we've also,
alive.
we've also got B. Mambros from Kentucky. Hey, how you doing? Good to see you here. And yes, if you have any questions for Loretta, please pop them into the chat. We'd be more than happy to address those. So let's talk a little bit about online presence, because I do a lot of online meetings, and and I was doing a lot of regular online meetings in 2019 and earlier. So I had kind of a earlier experience with
Mm.
this than I think the vast majority of people who kind of got thrust into this virtual meeting space by the events of 2020. And so what has amazed me is that beforehand, when I was meeting someone live, if I went to an office or a workplace, people were generally wearing business attire. And maybe in the summertime, if it was really hot, instead of ties, they were wearing a golf shirt. But they had still, it was clear, thought about what they were wearing that day before they left the house, right? And then all of a sudden, when we get into this space of more virtual meetings, that all just kind of fell apart, and people just didn't seem to be putting as much thought into how they came across. And in some of the training sessions I do where people are attending as students, same thing. If I was doing it in a boardroom somewhere and people were showing up live to sit down at a table and in front of a screen and talk with me in person, they would definitely be comporting themselves and attired differently than the way that I see people showing up. Can you talk a little bit about how people should be thinking about virtual meetings?
Yes, you nail it. When COVID started, everybody was in a way getting on this high of, oh, I don't need to dress up to go to work anymore. I literally thought about that myself. I'm like, every morning I would put makeup, I would put everything, nicely put together. For the virtual meetings, half of the body is not visible. Even anchors sometimes do that, on TV. There have been blobs and flops, on TV, even when, the top part looks good. And then they stand up in studio and walk away and they're wearing some type of messy shorts, with a suit jacket on top, or a nice blouse on top. So that high was there, I think, for a while. And then it wore down. I think for me, it wore down so quickly because I started feeling that same what you are saying, that people are not putting enough effort to really look good in the meetings. Sometimes they don't even turn on the cameras for that reason.
Mm.
So it's a challenge for some, but you reference the in-person meetings as well. Sometimes, depending on what type of business you're in or where you live, that formal attire is also not needed. So there's casualty depending on what environment you're in. Let's say if you're in a startup, people don't show up, dressed in suits anyway. You just have to be put together nicely. And sometimes I tell, people that in order to look like you didn't put any effort and you still look put together, it takes effort to look this way.
True.
It's simplicity. Sometimes it's even more difficult to achieve than, just putting a little suit coat or something nicer. And that's the impression that people get that you put together. So in virtual meetings, it's very important for me, and I come from the background of video, you have to understand. So for me, if I don't see the face, my brain says they're disengaged, they're planning to do something else while they're sort of listening in. And it does not help build that connection, that relationship of communication and trust either. Right? Because
Right.
you don't see them. You don't know what they're doing. Maybe they could be, I don't know, cooking something on mute, while there is a pretending that they're in, but they're not in mentally or not engaging. So to me, video has always been one of the key things where if I see you, then I feel I can read your body language. I can see your eyes. I can see where you're looking, what you're doing. That gives me the impression of how I need to communicate. How do I need to draw you back into the meeting somehow by making you pay the attention? So a lot of times people think that if you're from home, you need to be dressed like you're from home. I honestly saw, there was a video of a lady, I will not remember who it was, and she put together a quick reel video of her own virtual meeting attires that she used when COVID hit, and I think throughout the year. And every day in meetings, she showed up with a different outfit. She showed up like she's in the office, and it was just interesting to see the difference, how some people are sloppy and some people really put an effort in making sure that it feels like it's a business environment. Because the problem that a lot of us have had when it comes to working from home, obviously, you're in the home. You sleep here, you eat here. Now you have to work from here. So for a lot of people, that difference is very difficult if they're not used to it. I'm used to it. You may be used to it. Yeah, right? We have like a switch where it's like I'm in the office mode right now. That switch goes
Mhm.
off in the evening, and now I'm in the home home mode right now, right? I even change clothes when I'm in a home mode, so that it's psychologically there's a difference. And that also psychological difference comes from my background, right? When we moved to the United States, and I don't know how many international audiences you have here, but in Europe, you leave the house, you put something nicer. You don't leave the house in shorts and flip-flops in whatever, shirt, pajamas. So you leave the house, it's the impression that you give to people who you run into in the store, in the street, what you're wearing. When we moved here, I noticed that was not the culture in the United States. So for people, your home clothes sometimes are your street clothes, your store clothes. You go out in the same attire. And to me, that separation personally is very important. That at home, I'm in my home attire. When I'm in the office, when I'm in business, I'm in my business attire. Mm-hmm. So I think for a lot of US audience, was very difficult to separate that. Because to them, I'm just working from home. I'll just wear my home clothes. I don't have to go anywhere.
Well, and so I had worked from home for a long time before 2020. And so I, and I remember back before video chat. So in the early 2000s, I would do the same as you. I would actually get into a different set of, like, I would get into work clothes and I would go into my office in my home and then talk to people on the phone. Right. And so, Marshall McLuhan is this famous sort of media guy. I forget, I don't even know what term you would use to describe him, but he said the medium is the message. And when I think about a comment like that, I realize, hey, in these video chats, what are people trying to do over a Zoom meeting? I think they are really trying to approximate the face-to-face experience, right? So what I actually have made a conscious effort to do, probably for about a year now, is I've been asking myself before I invite people to meetings, does this need to be a video call? Like, are we going to be sharing documents that we're both going to be looking at? Is there a need for us to approximate that face-to-face experience? Or is it really just a meeting of the minds? Should I not just be calling this person on the telephone, right? And I've been making an effort to make more of my meetings just telephone meetings. And what I find interesting is, to your point, if someone shows up for a video call and their screen and their camera's turned off, number one, it's rude. If you're watching today and you don't know this, like, it is severely rude to show up to any kind of video chat, whether it's a meeting or a one-on-one call and you don't turn your camera on. It's like showing up to a meeting in an office and hiding behind something, right? So, but if I have a telephone appointment with somebody, we're not going to see each other, but doesn't come across as rude, right? Mm-hmm. And it's because we've agreed upon this different medium, and the expectations around that medium are entirely different.
Mm-hmm. You are so right. I'm curious actually to hear from your perspective, but I'll explain mine. Whenever there's a meeting, my default thinking right now, it's a Zoom or it's some type of virtual meeting, meaning if it's a virtual meeting, in my head, it's always a camera-based meeting. It's never a phone anymore, which is so bizarre, but that's how my head works. I like how you're actually saying that you can agree upon that in advance, which makes it so much more reasonable and sensible to do. But I know a lot of people don't do that. I don't do that 100%. There were a couple of meetings that I had scheduled with one of the consultants, and I didn't notice that was actually a phone meeting. It was never called out that it was a phone meeting. So I go in, before the call, I'm like, well, where's the Zoom link? Where's the Zoom link? I'm in a panic. I was like, I don't know where to go. And then I read through the notes. It's like, dial into this number. And it was a phone meeting. But in my head, and to a lot of people, I think the default now, throughout COVID and after COVID, it's a Zoom. It's some sort of virtual environment where we have to show up. It's not just a voice anymore, which is just crazy how the world shifted. Before, phone was something that you would recognize as a intermediate sort of way to communicate or connect, right? So that if you cannot make it in person, you just call somebody or text somebody. So I like the approach of having phone call meetings. But did you have that mindset throughout COVID? Well, did you ever have the default thinking that virtual meeting means online meeting in person room before you changed to agreements?
So it was interesting because I think when I would talk with people, I'm in Canada, and when I would talk with people in the United States or far away, and they would book the meetings through my Calendly link, it would automatically be created as a Zoom link. But when I was doing business with people here locally, for some reason, I would, again, this weird how habits form. It would be often that a phone number would be exchanged, and then I would say,
Interesting.
"Oh, I'm going to call you." The other thing too about phone numbers is that they seem to be more flexible. So
Hmm.
we create these calendar appointments for our video conference meetings, but if someone says, "I really need to talk with you," I'll just say, "Well, what's your phone number? I'll give you a call this afternoon." And
Mm.
it's like, oh, I've got 15 minutes between calls. Now I'm going to call that person. It's like also an invitation
Flexibility.
to more flexibility, right? Now, if they don't recognize my number when I call, they probably won't answer because we get calls from so many spam robots these days.
Yeah.
But I have found that if I make a conscious effort to schedule more telephone calls, it also gives me more freedom because I can drive my son to baseball, drop him off, park the car, and do a phone call
That
and
is very,
feel
very true.
much more comfortable doing that than, doing, for example, a Zoom call from my car.
Hmm. That is very true. I think one caveat to that is, let's say, and it's not obviously a rule by any means, but it got me thinking that, let's say, if I were to schedule a meeting with somebody, um, let's say I receive a lot of LinkedIn requests, right? And if somebody seems interesting to me where I would like to take the relationship further, I to me the first meeting has to be face to face. I just want to feel it all, just to understand if this is the right partnership, the right engagement. Is that the type of person I want to work with? I want to see their body language. I want to see everything about that person that helps me build a bigger picture. And then, move that into phone conversations, later on, once it's just a sync up, right? Just something that, the thought came through my mind when you were just saying all of this.
Well, along those lines, we have a couple questions here that I think, jive pretty well with what you're getting to here. So, Concise Advice wants to know, what common mistakes do professionals make when speaking on camera? So what should we be thinking about, when we
So
prepare?
let's define the camera as a virtual environment, is my assumption, because speaking on camera in a production setup is different than speaking on camera in a virtual environment. So let's limit it to the virtual environment.
Mm,
Um, if you are a leader of the meeting, my advice usually is try standing up, because I'm standing up right now. So it gives a different dynamics of how you communicate, how you use your hands, you can change your body. It's just a little bit more dynamic approach. A lot of times it all, again, depends on what the structure of the meeting is. If you're presenting, if it's very important, let's say it's a town hall, it's important that audience connects with you through your eyes. So even though I'm not looking right now into the camera directly, I'm looking at you, right? But when you're trying to connect with the audience specifically, you always need to try to keep your gaze into the camera lens, just because
okay.
people consume content, one-on-one, usually in these types of setups. So connection to the eyes is very important. So that's tip number two. Tip number three, try to don't have just a talk. Try to pull people into the conversation, because attention span, even in this setup, is so much smaller than consuming content on the go through YouTube or through whatever, Instagram, TikTok, wherever you consume your video content. People do get disengaged easily if you don't draw them in. So the biggest mistake leaders make is they just talk. They don't pause, they don't ask questions, they don't pull the audience in. So that's when it's very clear at the end of the meeting or in follow-up conversations, who paid attention, who didn't. People do zone out. There's so much more distractions to involve when you're on camera. Your frame is limited, right? Your frame is
Yep.
limited. You can have a screen open here, you can have a screen open there, you can chat with somebody, right? So your auditory and visual are distracted. So it's very important for leaders to really try to engage, have a little bit of like walkthrough before in any important meeting, what you want out of that meeting. Sometimes what I like doing, and people don't like it, but I put them on the spot saying, hey, have you heard what I said 5 minutes ago? What was your thought about that? This gives me an indication if people actually listened or not. And if they didn't listen, that means I didn't do my job well. right? That means I will have to follow up. I will have to re-explain things. So keep all of that environment in mind, that it's very easy to be distracted in this frame. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, it's almost like the lessons from kindergarten or grade one, when the teacher would randomly call on people to ask them questions to make
Yeah.
sure that they're paying attention. And I think there's a big difference here, isn't there, between somebody presenting something maybe to a dozen people that have all joined on a virtual call, like a virtual environment meeting, versus a one-to-one
Oh, yeah.
sort of face-to-face conversation, right?
Correct.
Because you know, um, there's another great question here um, from Victor. He says, "Hi, Loretta. How much difference do you think it makes psychologically to dress up rather than be in jeans and a t-shirt? Do you think people respond differently to different standards of dress?"
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm wearing a t-shirt, right? But this is my style. I like nicely put shirts, nice colors that fit me. If I go to a meeting, I would probably put a sports coat or something to lift it up, right? So it all depends on the environment. Psychologically, it's a huge, huge difference. There is a saying that we use in Lithuanian, and I don't know if there's a version of it in English. I don't know. I will try to translate. People greet you by the looks and lead you out by your intellect. I don't know if I did a good job in translating, but the what it means in the essence, it means that first impression matters. So you step
Yeah.
through the office door, people assess you right away. Right there in that moment, you're being assessed. Only when you start talking, once you start conversing, that physical appearance can be overlooked and not matter as much because of your intellect, of your brains, of whatever that conversation entails, right? Of your perspective, of your thoughts and ideas. But the same stands for virtual meetings. If you show up sloppy, I had at one point, attended a meeting where somebody just always looked like they're in a bathrobe, and I had to call it out. I said, what is it that you're wearing all the time? Because it just looks like you just got out of the shower and you have not had time to put yourself together. And he's like, no, it's just my sweater. That's how it's shaped. I said, well, for virtual meetings, it has to change because it does not look like a sweater at all. So even though it's cozy and comfy, you still have to present yourself in a more professional manner. Now, again, the caveat, right? People might say, well, my professional manner is a t-shirt, or my professional manner is this, Steve Jobs thing. As I said earlier in the call, sometimes simplicity is also difficult to achieve. So even simple things have to still look like they're put together well. It can't
Yeah.
be a t-shirt. Oops, sorry, I just speak. But it can't be a t-shirt that's with collar, all torn up or loose or baggy. It has to fit nicely. It has to have some structure. That applies anywhere you go. In virtual meetings, on camera, in a production studio, you just have to feel and look like your clothes fit on you. They're not too big. They're not too small. And
I
psychologically, sorry, because I know the question was psychologically.
yeah.
Psychologically, it does make a difference. And you can probably feel yourself, right? If you're going somewhere to a nice dinner or an event, you put on the suit, you put on something nice, and it just props you up right away, right? So
Yeah.
it's just the feeling, that it gives. Psychology of clothing, there's another art, it
It
does
gives
change.
you energy. It makes you feel authoritative.
Hmm.
Yeah. I've been trying to think if there's an equivalent expression. I think the one that may be closest is that you never get a second chance to make a first impression.
Ah, yeah, yeah, that could be that. Yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes. That's exactly what
You
it
know,
means. Mhm.
it's interesting because when I think about how people present themselves visually, I think of that guy, Sam Bankman-Fried, who I think is in jail now for that, the crypto exchange or whatever, and
Oh,
he
okay.
was always dressed up in a really, slovenly way, he was always really dressed down. He managed to raise hundreds of millions of dollars from investors for his
Mhm.
thing. But when I look at a guy like that and I think about what he was doing, I really think that he kind of had he was playing a character, right?
Yes.
And it was that maverick tech guy, Silicon Valley savant sort of character.
Mhm.
And I think he was leaning into that stereotype to try and, help, persuade people that he was, just so much more intelligent than they were, that they could just trust him, even though they couldn't understand what he was talking about most of the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about manipulation, pretty much, manipulating people into believing who they are when they're not. And I referenced earlier, it depends where you live. New York is known to have stylish people, stylish dressed people. I don't know about now, but before, right? There was New York, there was Silicon Valley, completely two different environments, of how people dress. And like I said, I come from Lithuania, so whenever you would go to the office, you would look like you're put together. In
Right.
Silicon Valley, when we moved, I recently told the story. My mindset early on was still, oh, I'm leaving the house. I need to put some makeup on. I need to look nice. And I'm just going only to the grocery store. And I remember I felt like I'm out of place because everybody was so dressed down that they were staring at me like, what am I doing here? Why do I look like I look? Do I even belong in this grocery store? It was just bizarre. Then I started observing, and some other people started telling me, hey, Loretta, here, you don't need to really dress up that well when you go to the grocery store. But to me, even if I'm not dressed, per standards, how we understand and understood back then in Europe or in my country, I still want to look like I'm put together. I would never leave the house in
Mm.
pajamas, like I wouldn't. And I don't think anybody should, for that matter. Or in airplanes, the clothing has become so loose right now that it's like, do you have any respect for you or somebody sitting next to you in how you look? You shouldn't look like you just came out of bed. But that's my perspective.
Yeah, and I don't think you're alone. Talking about, the way people dress, I mean, is dressing the right way a way to make yourself feel confident? Concise Advice has another question here about managing nervousness. I would think that if you look and feel great, it's gotta be something that gives you that extra bit of confidence in making a presentation.
Yeah. Again, let's limit the nervousness in front of the camera in a virtual environment.
Sure.
For a lot of people, that how to say, a lot of times people who are not used at presenting to begin with, they had to now adopt a new medium in presenting themselves. So that added additional layer of nervousness because, like I pointed earlier, you don't necessarily know where to look. You look into the camera lens, you feel you don't see your people, you don't know if they're engaged or not. You look into the frame of the video, then you're looking pretty much at yourself most of the time. And then you start struggling with the thought, oh my God, I don't like how I look, or you start fixing yourself and moving yourself around sometimes. To address the nervousness part, it's not a one rule that applies to everybody. It's just not, because we all come with our different experiences in life that makes us feel certain things when we present. So we have to first, and when I work with people, I have to first understand the roadblocks that they come with. Like, what is the biggest roadblock? Is it that you feel you're being judged? Is it that you don't know where to look? Is it that your content is not strong, or you're not necessarily sure what you're talking about? There's a lot of layers when it comes to nervousness. So it's very individual to a particular person. There's no one rule of thumb that would apply for everybody, except practice makes it perfect. That's what they say. So the more you practice, the more you hear yourself, the more you look at yourself, the better you will feel in these types of environments.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. Mila also agrees that presentation matters. Thank you very much, Mila, for commenting there. Before we go any further, I want to move away from how we are dressed. I want to talk about the space. So here I'm gonna back
Mhm.
things up so that you can kind of see my background. You see the bookshelf. You see the poster for my upcoming new book over there. What should people be thinking about? What's behind them? Because very interestingly, I saw a comment the other day from someone saying that when they see someone online with a blurred background,
Mm,
it makes them feel suspicious. And
mm.
I thought, "Oh, that's interesting," because I've never felt that way, but maybe other people feel that way too. So what can you give us about
Yeah.
how we should be thinking about what's behind us in these virtual meetings?
Yes. Not a lot of people have a luxury of having their own office space in their houses, so that's understandable. One of the key things that people should keep in mind, though, is to at least keep it neat. Keep the background neat. Whatever that background is for you in your home, it has to look neat. I am I am probably more understanding when it comes to blurred backgrounds, because if people cannot accomplish neatness, and let's say you're doing a video call from your bedroom and you really don't want people to see how your bedroom looks like, well, yes, you can blur out the background, or you can have a graphics, as a background that you can constantly use. That's maybe your branded, has some type of small message on it displayed that kind of is consistent with your look all the time. So that way you don't have to worry about the background or, the blurriness of your
Do you
background.
think it would be better, though, just to position yourself with a wall behind you or something?
Sometimes walls tend to be very boring, just plain walls. It is the safest bet, but it could be boring. Like, for example, if you look at my space right now, it's not ideal, but I recently shifted where my desk is. I have windows over here, so lighting is very important. I even have additional lighting, cast on me, so that I look good in terms of lighting. It's important to have good audio when it comes to background. So on my right over here there's a living room space, and over here there's kitchen, right? And I'm like, well, how do I fix this? Because I don't like people seeing my space in full. And sometimes
Mm.
I have family members who would walk into the kitchen to get some water. I don't want them to be in the background. So I kind of figured out, okay, if I have just long curtains, I will block them out. I was debating between, structured sort of enclosings, but then it was taking up too much of the space in my background in the room, right? I'm not completely happy, let's say, with the pictures and the images of in my frame, because it feels always like I'm covering them. And by the way, this is all Lithuania. So if I were to if I were to look at your space, right? I think you have the light on you. There's some type of light that I can see that's on you, but I
Yeah.
feel the background could have some sort of interesting lighting there too. It feels a little bit
It's too dark.
dark. Yes,
Okay.
I want it to be a little bit more happy, more bright. And I think overall the structure of your space is very nice. There's a marketing material on your, okay, I don't know how to point, but on your door, there's a bookshelf, and there's some sort of whiteboard. I think the space itself is really nicely structured, but I feel it's a little bit too dark, so maybe you can have even some artistic lighting, shown from the bottom. Sorry, I got confused which verb tense I should use.
Oh, it's okay.
If you could have the light shine. Okay, I don't know which verb to use. It from even white light or something, from the bottom up, in the background, to have a
I'm
little bit of
thinking
the
a
color
lamp
on
on the
there.
floor. I'm thinking a lamp
Yes,
on the
exactly.
floor
Kind of
will
propped it
illuminate everything
upwards.
back there. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And prop it upwards so that it gives a little bit of the haze of light, going on. For me, I'm lucky because I have windows, right? I have my office is really bright and light. So I'm lucky in that sense that everything looks somewhat evenly lit, and I don't have that issue. So
Well, the windows are just beyond the camera, and so the reason why I positioned everything was so that on a bright day that light
yes,
comes at me as
yes.
well. Yeah.
Yes. And if it is not a bright day, you might want to invest into a ring light that's constantly on your monitor as well.
Yeah.
So,
I don't know if you can see it in my.
oh yeah,
There you
I
go.
do. I do.
Yeah.
I think you can catch mine as well.
There you go.
Yeah. So the tip, right? Do not have it cluttered. If you feel you cannot hide the environment, try to use some branded graphics, but again, play with it, because not all graphics looks good either. Sometimes it cuts off hair. That's why I don't like it. Sometimes it cuts off hair, depending what color is the brand color, but blurriness, I'm personally okay with that, because I understand that sometimes people just don't have the luxury of having their own space.
Okay. So I've got another interesting question here that's come up in the
Mhm.
chat. Do you rehearse before an important Zoom meeting?
I personally do not go through a rehearsal myself, but I definitely go through the content of or agenda of what points I want to hit. That I think is important anywhere you go, because you want people to leave that meeting with certain message. And unless it's an official presentation, let's say to an analyst or investor or partners, right, or board members, I don't think you need to rehearse for every single customer meeting or every single employee meeting. But you have to know what points you want to hit. And that's important because that will help you stay focused. You can reiterate those points throughout the presentation so that it really stays in people's brains.
Mm. Yeah. Knowing your content. And I think, if I was going to comment on this question about rehearsing, I would say it depends on your level of experience and how many times you've presented the material or similar material before. I
Correct.
find that if you're always talking about the same topics over and over again, you can have a little hiccup where you kind of lose your place in your presentation. But because you've talked about it so many times, maybe there's like a little story or something you can tell that off by heart that just comes off really smooth, and it gives you a moment to kind of think about where you want to take things. The more you do something, obviously, the better you're going to be at it.
Yes. And that training, your own training always happens in customer meetings, right? You know the message you want to deliver, you know which points you want to hit, and that is transferable to any other environment, right? Because when you want to make a sale, there's certain points you want to hit, and then you talk to those points that click.
Yeah. And the other thing too that, back when I first learned to talk about sales calls, for example, back when I first learned my sales training, um, in a real professional way, was in my Yellow Page days, and we used to carry these binders with us, these little presentation books, and we had these sort of standard visual aids in there. So if we wanted to talk about a certain concept, like why a larger ad would be more effective than a smaller ad, I could flip to a page and there'd be some statistics or study
Yeah.
results or what have you, and it would help guide my thoughts. And, I remind people all the time, if you're going to appear in a virtual environment, you can have other things around the screen like that you can refer to a lot more easily. That you just like a little bullet point checklist or something on the side that you keep referring to. I do that all the time when I make my Wednesday morning videos that are kind of like me just addressing an issue. I've usually got checklists of bullet points of things I want to cover, and so you can certainly do that in a virtual meeting setup.
100%. 100%. Like I said, virtual meetings are a little bit more forgiving in that sense, but also risky for that same reason, because it may appear that that you are not sure what you're talking about. If your eyes start wandering too much from side to side and you start looking for things, it may appear that you're cluttered in your brain, that you're not focused. And that's when people start questioning your expertise. So it's good. It's a good tip, but you have to play around and see where you position those bullets so it doesn't look like you're looking way too far off of the actual center of the camera, wherever that camera is placed. And
Do
you
you know
don't
what I
want.
find helps? Is
Mhm.
because I do have a multi-monitor setup. I find
Mm,
that at the beginning of, it's particularly a training session where I might spend an hour with a group of people, I will tell them, I'll say, over here on this other monitor, I have these things that I'll be referring to.
yeah.
And
Mhm.
just to let them in on the secret sauce, because of that exact point that you're mentioning, when you keep looking away, it looks like you're not paying attention to that.
Yep. Yes. Yes. And communicate again. Communication is always key. Transparency is
Mm.
always key because people don't know that you have three monitors or two monitors. They will be thinking, oh, you're looking somewhere else. That's not important. We're trying to communicate back to you. We're sharing our points, and you're just trying to think about your next thing that you have to say. Um, yeah. Oh, one other tip actually that I should mention in terms of cameras. I know a lot of people tend to use laptop cameras, and they're not the best. So if you
Mm.
are in a laptop environment, I really still would advise you to invest in a nicer, external web camera that has good audio, has good visual, and it really up levels the overall look, of your presence online.
What about teleprompters? We have a question
Mhm.
here about whether you've ever used a teleprompter.
Thank you, concise advice, for asking so many great questions. Teleprompters, in a virtual environment, and I have not tested those tools yet, but there are tools that are coming out right now where, you know, they're better at showing your eyes through the teleprompter setup. Sometimes, it will feel like you're reading if you're not using the teleprompter correctly. So you
Right.
never want to come across like you're reading. And teleprompter trick in virtual and in person is the same. You have to read like you're telling a story. You have to read like you're conversing. You have to really be a little bit of an actor when using a teleprompter. If you're just reading it with no inflections, just a static, like an article, out loud, people will know that you're reading. So there is a little bit of acting involved when using a teleprompter. Some people master it. Some people take a longer time to master it, but there is a trick to it. One advice that I normally give to people when I coach them how to use a teleprompter is to imagine like you're reading a book to a child. Because you don't read in this one monotonous row, just to get through it. You read with a lot of inflection in your voice. You pause, you have them absorb the information. Obviously, the pauses should not be, 30 seconds long. It's like a brief pause, but in a virtual or, video environment, it will feel like it's the right amount of pause. So yeah, teleprompters are good, but you have to know how to use them so that you don't come across like you don't know your material and all you do is just read, scripts.
Yeah. Yeah, I've only got one experience with any kind of teleprompter. It was at the opening of this show, there's like a produced filmed
Yeah,
clip
I saw
of
that. Yeah.
yeah, and so the producer that helped me create that, they had an iPad, and I provided them a script, and he kinda held it up right beside the lens of the camera. It was like a big professional camera, so that I could, see my
Look like
script
you're
as I was going. But I've tried to create videos here before where I'm looking into my camera, which is only, like a foot and a half away from my face, and try to read something just beside the camera. And even at that with that short distance, it's obvious I'm not looking at the camera.
yeah.
And I've often just found, you know what, it's better for me just to reread this thing 10 times, try to commit the flow of it as best I can to memory, and then just stare in the camera and go. If I'm
Yes.
if I'm making like a canned sort of 30-second kind of thing.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there are tools these days, AI tools that people, invent and come out with to solve that eye connection problem in virtual environments. I have not tested them yet myself, but I know that there's softwares that help you even if you're not looking into camera somehow they put your eyes on camera. So I'm pretty sure technology will advance to the degree where it will be natural to read something here on the side, but it feels like you're talking directly to them. Nonetheless, it's
Like
still
like those creepy paintings from the Haunted Mansion that keep following you with their eyes?
oh no, I hate those. No, from the demos that I've seen, they actually do not look like that. So I'm
Okay.
optimistic. Again, I come from broadcast background. So to me, video has always been the aspect of realness. Whenever I see, even if it fixes the problem, to me, it becomes not real. And that somehow internally it causes a disconnect for me. So I'm all about real, even if I have to glance a little bit here and then look back, as long as I'm not constantly doing that, that's where it becomes disjointed. But if I look at the camera for a long enough time, I go through the message, then I kind of glance a little bit as if I'm thinking and back to the camera, then it's okay. But if you're constantly back and forth, that's when the disconnect happens because you're
Yeah.
just not connecting directly with the audience. Yeah.
Well, this has been fantastic. I think that you shared a ton of great stuff. I'm definitely going to get some kind of light that will sit behind me when I do videos and stuff. And Mila agrees. I need a light behind me. But where, if people are interested in talking with you more, Loretta, why don't you give us a quick rundown of how you work with people and where you can be found online?
Thank you so much for allowing me to do that. I appreciate that, David. I hang out on LinkedIn. That's my main platform. So people can connect with me on LinkedIn if they wish to. You can find the presence assessment on my website, loretta.today. Loretta is spelled with one T. Sometimes people make a mistake, but it's loretta.today. I have a presence checklist on the organization level and the executive level that people can download and go through the assessment, see how they score, and decide if they want to further improve their organization or their executive presence, and call me to figure out the plan of action.
Awesome. And as soon as we get off, I'm going to amend the show notes on YouTube, and it will be there for anyone listening in audio to include your LinkedIn profile and that the link to that
Thank you.
assessment as well. And I want to say a big thank you. It's been great to have you on and have this chat. I want to thank everyone who came live and made comments and questions. And just before we close off, we got we got one big question that just came in. What about a plant? Everyone puts a plant in the background.
Mm. So plants I have mixed feelings about. If they're far in the back, let's say if I were to point over here, right? If my curtain was open, I would, maybe consider a plant, but sometimes people put plants too close behind the bodies and it looks like the plants are just shooting out of their heads or shoulders. So plants could be risky.
I get you. I
Yeah.
get you. Awesome. All right. Well,
Thank
thanks,
you so
Loretta.
much. Thank you
We
so
will
much,
see
David, and
you
everybody.
later. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
So, how can you learn more about buying, selling, financing, and managing small and medium sized businesses? Easy. Go over to my blog site, davidcbarnett.com, where you can learn more about me and how I work with my clients. You can learn more about my books and courses that I've prepared for you. You can find out how to subscribe to my email list, the YouTube playlists, and more. There's literally hundreds of hours of content there, all for free, and I'd love for you to be my guest. Special thanks go to Mark Willis at Lake Growth Financial, today's video sponsor. Mark helps people better manage their personal and business finances through the Bank on Yourself insurance strategy. This is something I've done personally and I've seen others use it successfully for years. Go to newbankingsolution.com to find all the interviews I've done with Mark and learn more about the advantages of these programs. While there, sign up for a free consultation to learn what this solution might look like for you.
And don't forget, Labor Day, my new book, Buying versus Starting a Small Business, hits Amazon. It's going to be available on Kindle, paperback, and audio. So, see you later.